the live stream going. I got the recording going. Okay, everybody. Hi, Ken Burek here, welcoming everybody back to the second session of the second day of the 2020 virtual Northampton Community College Peace and Social Justice Conference. First of all, I just want to mention to everyone that we are both recording and live streaming this event. And so if anybody feels uncomfortable having their voice or video feed, audio or video feed coming through and being recorded and live streamed, then we encourage you and invite you to turn off your audio and or your video so that you can remain anonymous. And if you want even more anonymity, then you can actually go into the upper right hand corner of your little Zoom window and rename yourself anything more anonymous than the name that's coming up. Okay, so we're very excited about today's session. One of our guests, I believe, has not yet arrived unless he's DD. But what we're going to be talking about is the title of the panel is Police Free Future. And we have Ashley Strange from Lehigh Valley Stands Up, and have invited as well Peter Van Conet, I hope I got that right, from MPD 150 in Minneapolis, to come talk about this. The description is Peter will present an overview of MPD 150's work, a history of the Minneapolis Police Department's oppressions, theories of a history of the Minneapolis Police Department's oppressions, as well as talking about theories of abolition and tools to practice abolitionist thinking. Ashley will present on Lehigh Valley Stands Up, in particular policies which bring us closer to a police-free future. I'd like to thank Ashley for coming. Peter makes it. I'll thank him as well. And Nathan Carpenter is the moderator of the event. Welcome guests, welcome moderator, welcome participants. And here we go. I hand the mic over to Nate Carpenter.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks everybody for coming out this morning. I'm really excited about today's panel and have been looking forward to it for a long time. Kicking us off today will be Ashley Strange. Ashley is the regional organizer for Lehigh Valley Stands Up, which is an organization here in the Lehigh Valley advocating and working towards racial and economic justice. She was born in Fairbanks, Alaska, and moved to the East Coast in 2013. Prior to organizing for Lehigh Valley Stands Up, she was a communications director at Make the Road PA. And she has volunteered in organizations across the country, including the NPR, AmeriCorps, college campuses, food banks. As a woman of color, she sees potential and power of her community and strives to fight for equity every day. Ashley is going to be here talking about the work that Lehigh Valley Stands Up has done in relation to racial justice and justice for sort of incarceration justice, because we can talk about it in that way. So without further ado, Ashley, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. And thanks everybody for joining. So gosh darn early on a Wednesday. I hope y'all are doing, fairly good. I want you to take a second and make sure that you've stretched properly, because you're about to be sitting for a while. So let's get nice and loose up. So the person that is supposed to be presenting with me, Peter from MPD 150, isn't able to be here. Luckily, he shared with me some of the things that he was going to share. So I'm just gonna kick over and try and wild ball some of the stuff that he sent me. So MPD 150 is in Minneapolis. It's a community-based initiative challenging the narrative that police exist to protect and serve. Those are two words that we say police are supposed to do. They are supposed to protect and serve. If you don't mind in the chat, if you could write down the two words that are the two words that come to mind for you personally when you think about police. If they are protect and serve, then, you know, great for you. But write down two words that that let you think about police. So there's a lot of local organizers and researchers that are focusing on policing in Minneapolis, shifting from reform. A lot of us have heard of police reform, but what we want to do is we want to shift to structural change. This is not one project for any one organization. So some of the things that a police-free world looks like. And I'm going to read them just in case some people are having trouble seeing. It's a community-centered lifestyle where the young, old, and everyone in between are full participants, and everyone's whole personhood is prioritized. We are committed to everyone's needs being met. We believe in solutions that are big enough to embrace us all. We protect each other. People have more capacity to build, dream, and imagine, and we can focus on healing historical and intergenerational trauma. People take ownership of public spaces and respect boundaries and collectivity. We have hard conversations with ourselves and each other. We make room for laughter. Justice is prioritized over retribution. Healing is prioritized over righteousness. No one is disposable. And finally, the community gets to believe in its own power again. We have the answers to heal and keep each other safe, and we just need the space to do it. So these folks at MPD 150 have put together a whole bunch of stuff, not just resources, which I'll get into in a little bit, but also some art exhibits, a comic book, a magazine, and they've been doing a lot of different organizing efforts like Reclaim the Block, which you'll see in a lot of larger cities. Now, I went to Minneapolis just a few, goodness, when was it? It was last month. I went to Minneapolis to visit some of my partner's family, and one of the we went to the spot where George Floyd had been murdered, and for 2 blocks in every direction from that street corner, the streets had been shut down. There were benches, enormous memorials, groups of flowers, candles, and there was they had converted the overhang, the bus stop, into a place where people could keep signs that had fallen into disrepair or tools so that people could sweep the streets. They had water spigots lined up along the outside so that anyone who needed to, could come and refill water. And the actual store, because if some of you aren't familiar, George Floyd back in May was accused of using a counterfeit $20 bill in a grocery store. It was later the people at the store called the police. The police came and arrested him, and then one of the officers, Derek Chauvin, placed his knee on George's neck for 8 minutes and change, and eventually George died. So it was found later that the $20 bill was in fact not counterfeit. The store is still operating. All of the windows are boarded up, and actually for miles around in Minneapolis, you'll see Targets, bars, jewelry stores. No one has exposed windows anymore. They're all boarded up. Because of the intense community reaction to what happened, not just on that day, but also what happened before then, and what we know is going to happen after. I'm going to take a second to read some of the chats in here, because I'm going to ask you to to write something else into the chat. When you think about the police, some of the words that people think of are over abuse of power, opaque, vigilant, police state, respect, oppressor, strikebreaker, scary, intimidating, capitalist property protection, and systemic racism, and consumption of taxes. So we've got a lot of things. I'm not one thing that I'm not seeing is protect and serve. I'm seeing respect. I'm seeing I'm seeing a lot of like over abuse of power, and so this isn't something that's on any one officer. When we're talking about a police-free future, it's not because I, as a person, despise one officer as a person, and so I want them to be fired from their job. When we're talking about a police-free future, the way that Minneapolis 150 is talking about it, is we are talking about the fact that police were originally created to capture runaway slaves. And we know that working toward a police-free future means that we need to look at the roots of the system, not necessarily the individuals, though the individuals are a symptom of what the whole system is, but we need to look at the symptom. Praise the Lord. Peter has decided to join us to actually talk about MPL 150. Peter, welcome. I went over a brief overview. Please take it away from me.
Thank you for filling in. I got mixed up about time zones. I'm here in Minnesota and was waiting until 9:30 to chime in. I'm gonna share this presentation up here and go through it. Is everybody seeing that?
Yeah, hit present.
Hit present.
Top right-hand corner.
Yep.
There you go.
Sweet. Cool. This is actually, so this is modified from another presentation I gave pretty recently. So I'm just gonna act like Ashley didn't, I don't know what Ashley said and didn't say, so I'm just gonna go on my own. So I'm from an organization, MPD 150 in Minneapolis. Been organizing with them for the past 3.5 years or so. And we were founded in 2017, which was the 150th anniversary of the Minneapolis Police Department, and we were like, wanted to kind of capture that moment. We were expecting them to like make a big deal out of it, so it was kind of like a try to hack it kind of thing, and take it and like use their moment as our moment kind of thing. But they didn't even seem to notice that it was their 150th anniversary, but we did, and so we were doing a lot of work around that. Like, okay, what can we do to use that as a moment of assessment and reflection, and be like, okay, 150 years is enough. So that was the title of a report that we came out with in the same year, Enough is Enough, and 150 years of the Minneapolis Police Department. And this presentation contains a lot from that report, and that's really our core work. I encourage you to read it. It's available on mpd150.com. So one of the main things, I'm gonna skip that one and the cute bees. Oh, I'm skipping through a little bit because this was originally a longer presentation. If I have some extra time, maybe I'll go back. So yeah, the history of the Minneapolis Police Department. Ashley just mentioned that in the South, they largely emerged from slave patrols. In the North, it was a little bit different. They emerged from like town watch institutions, which were kind of the same institution, but up here they had very different functionality. One of the main ones was like they were they were basically like, they were monitoring Native people, particularly Dakota people in this area, because there was conflict, as many know, and especially at that time, 200 years ago or something around here. And then eventually 150 years ago, those were professionalized somewhat and actually made part of the town institution in a formal way, and again, given the title police department. And that's as the city here was starting to grow a lot, as it was moving from kind of a lumber town, and then it was starting to move to be more of a milling town as they dammed up the river here. So it's starting to get much bigger. And yeah, and especially some of the, and this is, we don't have a lot of history. A lot of the history is lost, and we don't have, people weren't capturing incidents on their cell phones back then, so we don't know entirely what was happening. But some of the best documented things that we have, like about what the police did, were they were just involved in countless efforts to break unions, to harass workers, both in the above ground and underground economies. You'll see here like harassing sex workers, and just like big union breaking operations were really a core function of what they were up to and what they were used for. And this just increased in the next 50 years as the power of the unions increased here, and had some pretty notable standoffs, which were basically unionists versus police here. So even early on, you see this really core demonstration that that's like one of the main things they did was oppress working class people, stop working class people from gaining power relative to rich people. And yeah, we have it really well documented. Yeah, oppressions against Native people, oppressions against people of color here, oppressions against Black people, especially as more people started to move here. And something else that's really interesting about the police department is, like, during this time, it's not very professional. Like in those early years, in those first like 50 years or so, they didn't wear uniforms. They openly drank on duty. It was just much more wild. And, I think you see those kinds of depictions in movies where it's much more just like drunk dudes hassling people. And yeah, somewhere like in the early 1900s, there started to be a movement towards professionalization, which continued. Like they're like, okay, they're actually, you can track, and I forget the exact date on that. It's in the report that they actually, outlawed officers from drinking on the job, that they gave them uniforms. And you kind of see this, and this has just increased throughout the history, this folding of the police department just deeper and deeper into the city apparatus. And obviously we see now that they still have a lot of, actually, I'll come back to that. So I think like it becomes more a part of the city system. And then, in the 60s, like getting into more modern history, if that's modern, I guess it's quite a while ago now, but you start to see some of the most and maybe this is just a matter of documentation and what we're able to find, but some of the most egregious documentation of violence against Black people, both against people who were doing political work, like as repressive tactics, and just people who weren't involved in that work. They were just caught up in that, and that was really well documented, and it has been since then. Just this, huge violence against Black people and Native people in the city too, because we have a really large Native population relative to most cities. And again, you start to see, this is when you kind of start to see the cycle of modern policing that I have here on the right, which is, I think, the most important thing that we took away from doing our work is just how long these cycles have been happening. They really have been since the 60s, that you have a period of, you have this initial, some brutal or murderous act that the police do. They kill somebody, they beat somebody up without any kind of good justification. And there's public outrage, and that happened in the 60s, and that's happened pretty much every 5 or 10 years since then. Some particular thing has happened, and you see, and then after, if there's enough outrage and protest, there's some kind of reform. And it's not in an abolitionist direction. It's usually a lot of times it actually increases the size of the police force or gives them more trainings. Or it's like, okay, we need more officers in this area to make sure this doesn't happen, or we need to give them different technologies or better training. So it's actually leads to, it either leads to not, it doesn't lead to less policing. It either leads to the same amount with like trying to change the techniques, and or it just leads to more policing, more trainings, a new review board, kind of increasing the size of the apparatus, which is a lot, you know, it's a very similar thing to what's happened with in the prison reform movement. A lot of times reforms just actually make the system bigger and more solid. So then, and then we, you know, it hasn't changed the core issues which lead to violence, the core functions of the police department, which have always, you know, perpetrated violence, and it's not because of bad training, it's because that's what it was established to do. And so then you get that, and then that happens again, and then of course another few years later there's a particularly bad case and the cycle starts over again. And yeah, I think it's wild, just like you read the history reports from in this, and it's just like I've been doing work around policing for the last 5-6 years or so, and you know, it's really humbling when we see that you read a report from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and you're like, oh, they were saying the exact same things, and they tried to establish a civilian review board and it fell apart, or they tried to do some different training and it fell apart. And it just feels like you're reading something that could have been right today, and it doesn't feel like we've gotten anywhere. And so that's why that's kind of like, you know, that's kind of this know your history, point in a different direction, and is why we have this arrow on the other side as abolitionist theory, abolitionist practice as a way to break this cycle, because this cycle isn't working for us. It's just perpetuating violence. These are some frequently asked questions that we pulled from our website that are some of our most viewed materials online, and just kind of speak to some common fears that I think we all have, people in the movement and outside the movement. And here's just some of our. So won't abolishing the police create chaos and crime? How will we stay safe? I think that's a lot of people's knee-jerk reaction. And this is the illustration on the right's actually, this is actually done before the police station got burned. This particular police station got burned up, but so that was kind of a weird premonition. This is done like a year and a half ago or something. We're talking about, so I think, I think it's important to establish when you're talking about abolitionism that there's a lot of divergence within the movement about what that looks like. I think some people would snap their fingers and just have the police department disappear and see what happens and make people figure it out. I think the majority of people, including the majority of people within our group, and there's still a lot of diversity within that, talk about that more as a gradual process, as more of a building process than a taking away process, like that we are, or as both at the same time, that we are building these alternative institutions, that we are strategically reallocating resources and funding to the responsibility and towards very concrete other things that are very concretely that acknowledge that there are some things that the police department is currently doing that we want other things to do. And there's some things that we don't want to preserve. And it's kind of like sorting through that and being like, okay, how do we actually protect people during this time? How do we do what they're doing, or a lot of times it's what they claim to do, and in some occasions do. So this is a common one. It's just like, okay, well, what are you going to do if somebody, shows up at your house with a gun, or how are you going to stop bank robbers, kind of thing? That's a question that we get a lot. And yeah, I think I have two responses to that. Like one is the one here is that, like, a lot of times that abolition takes a deeper view about how to fight crime. It isn't just showing up at the scene of the crime and punishing the person who is committing the crime. A lot of times it's being like, it's how do we take a more holistic view? How do we actually prevent, why is somebody robbing a bank in the first place? Why is somebody committing a murder in the first place? And trying to address the systems that have that. And this illustration we have comes from Reclaim the Block, which is one of MPD 150's partner institutions that is, we aren't very policy oriented. We kind of focus on theory and history, and they do a lot more of the concrete policy work with city council and some of the other institutions. And this is just showing like a very apt description of our budget, that we fund police better than we do all of these other institutions, which are actually do more to support people and will, like, if properly supporting people, giving them, supporting jobs and schools and healthcare and things like that, make it so people aren't going to commit crime, like vastly wouldn't commit crimes. And there's still some, of course, there's still some situations where there may be violent activities happening, and most abolitionists aren't against the idea of there being some subset of civil servants which are responding in those situations, whether they're de-escalators, whether some people in the abolitionist movement are in support of like there being still like people who are able to forcibly intervene in situations and that aren't the police, but are some other subset of civil servants that may even be armed or trained in that way. And that's obviously like a complicated territory, but that's something we're open to. It's as long as it's a different institution and it's used properly. And then the third thing I think I'll say is like, I think the police department has gone to great lengths to make it seem like this is what they do, is stop robbers and murderers and supervillains. But the reality is that's not what they do. That they usually show up too late, that they spend most of their time following up on things, giving people traffic tickets. Like if you actually like stop a murder in progress, you're going to be officer of the year. Like that's something that happens once in a while. But the reality is they just show up too late. And that's, if you look at, there's a good New York Times study, you can look like, what do officers actually do? And it's mostly like traffic tickets and following up on domestic violence calls. And so that, and those are things that it's like, you do not need to be armed, and like there's people who could do both those things better. Traffic tickets are a whole other thing. Maybe nobody needs to do that at all, but how am I doing on time? Let's see.
So I will not have a lot to follow up on after your fantastic presentation. So he can have a portion of my time. I yield a portion of my time.
Yeah. So let's say maybe we'll shoot for like maybe 10 minutes or so, because there's a lot of questions that are coming through the chat, and I know that I want to give a little bit of time to Ashley, and I want to be able to have you address some of those questions. So let's maybe shoot for 10-ish minutes. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, that's fine. Do I want to do this one? A lot of people just want to, this is kind of like this slide has to do with reform, and like a lot of people are like, okay, well, what if we have body cameras, trainings, and reforms? And it's just been really interesting because before all this, Minneapolis was really the poster child for police reform. We'd put in a lot of the most cutting edge police reforms, body cams and community policing. And, this is a very progressive city and was trying to be progressive about its police department. So it was trying to do everything, all the reforms you could, and really it was doing a lot of things that other cities are talking about. We did 5-10 years ago at least, and they just really haven't done much at all. That haven't led to less violence, haven't led to more accountability. That with body cameras, like we've seen that, so even when these things are captured on video, much of the time that it doesn't lead to justice. And so this is more of a Minneapolis. This is kind of getting into a lot of the other thing that our organization does is we do just more like kind of concrete trainings for organizations. For instance, this PowerPoint was originally made for a presentation we did at a brewery that wanted to like use police less. And so they brought us in to talk to their employees and just their general community about how we can avoid this. So this is very Minneapolis specific resources here, but I think this is valuable work to do on your own or as an organization, is to find these things and be like, okay, what already exists in my community that I can do instead of calling the police? Like there's probably and sometimes there's not the things that you want them to be, but a lot of times there's alternative organizations for responding to domestic violence or sexual violence. A lot of times there's alternative like mental health emergency response teams that aren't the police. Emergency like drug people for like responding to drug crises. So this is just like really good work to do in your local communities, is find these if they have, or if these have already been put together, and just like on your own, you know, put these in your phone numbers, be familiar with them, know how they work.
And just as an aside, 211 is also a number that's an alternative. We talked about it a little bit during yesterday's platform, but 211, the United Way number, can usually hook people up with resources, but a lot of it comes down to the fact that they don't have the funding that the police does to adequately assist the community. And so when we're saying that we're looking toward a police-free future, we're looking to fund existing things like 211.
Yeah, exactly. This is a little bit of another thing that we do is this is one of my favorite things to do with people, because I think it's, even if you get in a room of people where everybody is like completely down with police abolition, I think this activity is just helpful to do over and over again, because where you find things in your own life, times where you've called the police maybe, or somebody you know's called the police, or you've thought about calling the police. And you just assess first, you're like, okay, what actually happens when you call the police? Here, this isn't showing all of them. I think we filled this more out in the actual thing. So I think fare evasion is not the biggest issue. I mean, I think that public transportation should be free, but so it's not really an issue.
Not to mention public transportation in the Lehigh Valley is a disaster.
Yeah. So thinking more like mental health crises would be a better example. Like, okay, like what happens next? So I think this is just a great opportunity that I'm not going to go through now, but this is something we do in workshops a lot, and I just try to do by myself all the time when I see things happening, because like, even as people who, even as like, this is just me talking personally, even as somebody who's like, yes, I'm in favor of abolition, like that's a lot of the public work I do, I still have my doubts about it sometimes. And like confronting those doubts, like kind of moves me deeper, because it's really easy to say, like, you know, it's very hip to say you're an abolitionist now. And like, it's very easy to say that, but I think that getting into these nitty gritty things, like, okay, somebody, you know, I live in a neighborhood, like somebody got shot a few weeks ago, and like what do you want to happen in those situations? Like, and like some of that is, or like what needs to happen in order for those not to exist, or there's a lot of drugs in my neighborhood, like, and going through these situations and really brainstorming as a community, like, okay, how could we respond to that as a community? What other institutions could exist to respond to that? What would need to happen to make sure it doesn't happen in the first place? And yeah, I mean, a lot of that just gets, I mean, it can be really humbling that you realize that this is not an easy process by any means. And a lot of these questions are really complicated. And, you know, that's work to be done. And it's really difficult work. And I believe in it, but I think these exercises are both challenging, but also kind of ground you deeper into the reality of what abolition would actually look like. And I think, yeah, I think that's a good place for me to close out and turn it over to Ashley.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you so much. That was excellent. Can you pull up the second to last slide that you had there?
Yes, I just closed everything down.
That's all right. So one of the things I'm going to ask is for mental health. I want you all to picture that if you're sitting near a window, I see a lot of people sitting near windows. Let's say you take a look out the window and you see a young Nate Carpenter wearing nothing but a pair of boxer briefs, and he's doing the worm on your lawn and singing "Sweet Home Alabama." I want you to picture who you're going to call. What is the number that you're... I was just muted by someone. That was fun. So Nate, I'm sorry I brought you into this. Was that if that prompted the muting? But
No.
No, that was me. That was me I'm trying to mute myself while I'm screen sharing.
all right. What a good time. So if you want to go ahead and drop in the chat, this is the same question that I posed to one of the participants yesterday. But if you don't mind dropping in the chat, who are you going to call when you see Nate out there doing that? A lot of people yesterday, someone said, well, I don't want to call the police, so I don't know who I would call. I would probably just call no one and lock my doors. But that means Nate isn't getting the help he needs, and you aren't getting the help that you need. And so thank you, Anna. So there is a crisis center. And one of the things that a social worker brought up yesterday is that the crisis center often has to, when they get called to a scene, often they are accompanied by a police officer. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to think about what happens when someone without a gun and a badge and a taser and mace, what happens when they need to handle something like this? And I'd ask the same question that someone said yesterday was, well, I'm a social worker. We have to exhaust absolutely everything before we can use any kind of force. And we're never equipped with guns or tasers. And so when we're looking at this, like, how would we expect a police officer to handle it? We mentioned earlier that their slogan is to protect and serve. And a lot of folks here mentioned that, you know, that's not really the majority of what people think that they actually do. So how do you expect them to handle it? How do they handle it? Is it worse or better than people usually anticipate? And then what is an alternative solution? Is it funding the United Way? Is it getting funding from the police to completely different organizations? Deirdre said that she would probably go outside and try to talk to the person and then try to find them help. Honest to God, that's what we're trying to build with a police-free future. It doesn't require funding from anyone except for you trying to call someone to find them help, maybe calling them a lift to see if they need to go somewhere, getting them a towel. But when we're talking about a police-free future, Deirdre is the person that we're talking about, because we want to make sure that we are caring for ourselves and we're caring for each other. Now, not everyone is in a position to do that, so we need to make sure that we have resources available. We need to make sure we have alternative solutions available for folks who, you know, might be home alone and not know whether or not Nate is rabid or something. Not saying you don't look like a person who's rabid, Nate, just letting you know. And he asks, is there a doc like the one that Peter showed in a previous slide about alternative resources we can post and share here with the community, or is this work that needs to be done? It's definitely work that needs to be done here in the Valley. The Lehigh Valley Mutual Aid is an organization that has put together a spectacular resource list and contains some alternatives to calling the police. Let me just So they have put together an extensive mutual aid. And it looks like there's someone from Sustain LV. Peter, just because I can see that your email is peter@sustainlv.org. Do you mind chiming in on what needs to be done exactly? Is he able to come off of mute? Can you hear us, buddy?
Yes.
All right. So in your work with Sustain LV, you know, what are some of the mutual aid things that we can use, and what are some, and are there listed alternatives to calling the police, and is that something that needs to be worked on?
This is something the Alliance has not really done much with, except that I have been for a few years conducting a internship on community and restorative justice. And this is really such an eye-opener for students that it doesn't really get to the fully into the alternatives just because of time limitations. But I think that it's very clear to a lot of students now what hasn't been clear to a lot of adults, which is that they don't have to be afraid of a so-called police-free future. That, yes, they have concerns about what about when that violent person comes along, but they also see alternatives like in Austin or Eugene, Oregon, where people are doing things to keep the police out of these. Austin has mental health trained paramedics. Some of their paramedics are mental health trained. So they send those people to respond to a distress call, not police, or that depends on the dispatcher. I think it's not a perfect system the way they've implemented it.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks a lot, because that's one of the big things, is that we never know who's going to show up, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that you know, somebody mentioned, I'm just going through some of the questions in the chat. Ken asked about how to address the current threat of heavily armed right-wing militias, including those planning to show up to polling stations in November. And to that, Ken, I say you could very easily be talking about the police. Because the only officers that are supposed to be anywhere near polling sites are constables. And often there are sheriffs or there are other police officers. And so one of the things that Lehigh Valley Stands Up is trying to do is talk to the counties and find alternatives to having police at these places, which makes it, you know, very, very hard for people to vote. One of the things that, and Peter mentioned that the correct term, in fact, is domestic terrorists, although Pennsylvania is a state where you can bring a gun to the polls. And so knowing this, it is one of, I believe, 5 states that allows this. Knowing this, we are not in any way encouraging people to, you know, bring their own guns to the polls, but we are having, hey, Peter, do you mind? Do you mind just going and stop sharing? There we go. So one of the things that we are doing is we are making sure that we have enough poll workers. Lehigh and Northampton County need about 200 more people to work the polls. And that is another thing that we can do to make sure that everyone's vote is cast safely. Now, specifically on a police-free future, Lehigh County tonight is actually planning on, they are, excuse me, it's way too early in the morning. Lehigh County is putting together an initiative by Commissioner Dave Harrington to move funds from the Lehigh County District Attorney and move them into the Lehigh County Public Defender's Office. And so one of the things that we've seen, and you can go ahead and sign this petition here, we're going to present the petition at the meeting tonight. One of the things that we have seen is that whenever someone hears that their funding is being taken away, they immediately get hostile. They fight like hell, and they find any way possible to make sure that that doesn't happen, even if it's not in the best interest of the community. So we have already seen that the DA's office, responded to this and with outrage and said, it's clear that you're targeting us. Yes, it is clear that we're targeting you, because the district attorney is the chief law enforcement officer and our campaign is to defund the police. So yes, we would like to defund you. Thank you. And so what we're doing is we're moving money away from, as Peter was saying earlier, away from some of the retribution, I can't think of the word right now, but some of the more poorly formed aspects, and moving it into ways that we can actually help our community. Kareem says, one of the concerns that I have with the term defund the police is perceived by many as a way to say that we do not want the police. But I believe that the initiation of this movement is based on making sure that the current process and training that our police officers receive is outdated and needs revamping. We need law enforcement to be trained with social justice, community policing mindset, de-escalating techniques, training on biases, equitable resources, etc. So one of the things, and Glenn is from Lehigh Valley Mutual Aid. Glenn, if you could drop the resource list, that would be dope, because I think I just dropped it to your Facebook page. So I want to specifically address what Kareem is mentioning. And I want to do that by talking about the 8 to abolition. So I'm just going to share my screen here real quick. Some of you have heard of the 8 that can't wait. The 8 that can't wait means like, releasing use of force policies, enabling body cams for all officers, making more training available. And all of those things require more money for the police that the police department need. So when I say, and when members of Lehigh Valley Stand Up say defund the police, what we are saying is that the reforms that a lot of folks are talking about are not actually going to improve anything. It is going to lead into that cycle, and I'll have Peter bring up the image of his cycle one more time after I'm through screen sharing. But it just leads to the cycle that doesn't end in people feeling more safe. So the first step is to defund the police, is to move that money, reallocate the money from the police and put that into the community so that we can begin to police ourselves. And by police ourselves, so that we can begin to take care of ourselves, excuse me. And so that's what it means to defund the police. That's number one. Demilitarizing communities. That means, making sure that communities are not constantly under fire, making sure that there's no surveillance that is making it more accessible for people to become incarcerated, and a lot of those things. And you can find this all on 8toabolition.com. Getting police out of schools. That's something that Lehigh Valley Stands Up has been pushing very, very hard for the Allentown School District and the Bethlehem School District to do. And we know that the South, I think it's the Emmaus School District, just added a police officer. But we've had a lot of presentations to both Allentown and Bethlehem School District, and we know that the best way to abolish police is to not turn our schools into prisons. Speaking of prisons, number 4 is to free people from jails and prisons. There are a lot of people who are in jail who have not been convicted. And we're not just talking about, taking the good people out. Prisons were not built to help people. Prisons were built to keep people away, from the general public. And that is not at all restorative practices in any way. So there's mandatory arrest laws that we can take down. What I was saying about the Lehigh County signing that petition to cut funding to prosecutors' offices. And also something that Lehigh County has been working on is making communication to and from all prisoners free. And that's something that Mark Pinsley has been working on. So 5, repeal laws that criminalize survival, like homelessness, or for example, like Peter was saying, a lot of the reason why people commit crimes is because they are placed in a situation where they need to steal, or they need to, take something that doesn't belong to them. So providing them with educational opportunities and getting rid of laws that criminalize survival, like medical marijuana and recreational marijuana, those things. Investing in community self-governance. That's a big one. Do you know how many people that are on the Allentown City Council are former cops? It's 2 or 3. I think it's just 2. But a lot of the decisions that City Council has made is because they are fighting for their own pensions. And so we don't want governance that only looks out for themselves. We want to make sure that we, the people, are invested in self-governance. Providing safe housing for everyone. Like I was talking about decriminalizing homelessness, we need to make sure that everyone has safe housing. And then that way, the police, Peter mentioned that, what did the New York Times say that police do? It's just handing out a lot of citations. You can't, handing out citations to homeless people is criminalizing homelessness. And then talking about 211 and Lehigh Valley Mutual Aid, investing in care, not cops. So the end goal of these reforms is not to create better, friendlier, or more community-oriented police or prisons. Instead, we hope to build toward a society without police or prisons, where communities are equipped to provide for their own safety and well-being. Peter, if you wouldn't mind pulling up just that one slide with the cycle in it. And so Kareem, I hope that that answered your query over there. Oh boy. He working on it. And so, yeah, yes, so another way, and I'll just drop our link tree in here so that we can talk about. All right, thanks, Kareem. So that if you have any other questions about Lehigh Valley Stands Up, some of the links will be able to help you, especially when it comes to self-governance. We're X weeks away. I hate countdowns. We are X days away from an election. And it's an election that will not only decide the presidency, but also the treasurer. So who's handling all the money that we're wanting to reallocate, and also the attorney general, who has been slightly less than helpful when we are trying to push a lot of these resources. Hey, Peter, the screen that we're looking at is a photo of Arnesia Orange.
Oh yeah, that's no good.
We would, in fact, like to support young adults through their journey. Yes.
She's killing it. Really. Okay, let's try that again. I've not been zooming lately. This is tricky. Okay. Stop that recording. No. Share a different screen. Aha. Yeah, that one.
There we go. So this is the cycle of police reform that Peter was talking about, where something happens. So a brutality or murder or harassment, and not just any brutality, murder, or harassment, but the ones that are actually caught on camera. Those are the ones that kick into this next cycle, which is outrage. And then people demand reform, and then there's stagnation, backsliding, and then right back into brutality. We saw that where after George Floyd was killed, we were in the streets in Allentown and Bethlehem a lot of folks in Easton, multiple times a week, saying that we were calling for an end to police brutality. And a lot of councils tried to push some meaningless words in reforms and things like that. And we saw exactly how useless it was. For example, the police chief in Allentown said, we already use the 8 that can't wait. We already utilize all of the 8 that can't wait stuff. And so what are you worried about? And then 3 weeks after George Floyd was killed, there was a man in Allentown who was filmed with an officer putting their knee on his neck.
Mm.
So when we are constantly calling for reforms and they said, yeah, we do it, we absolutely saw this exact cycle right here in the Valley. And we know that police have killed in every single police station in the Valley, of which there are many. We know that they have killed someone in every single station. So I would kind of like to wrap it up on that and answer a few more questions. So Nate, if you have any follow-up questions for that, and kind of what we can do here in the Valley, Lehigh Valley Stands Up is we're a 501c4 organization. Our 3 campaigns are anti-gentrification, defunding the police, and voting rights. We are X days away from an election, so we're really focused on this one, but we need to make sure that even after the election, people know that their rights can't be infringed upon. And so we are building a coalition of people, not of Lehigh Valley leaders. We're building a coalition of people who are going to work together to defeat a lot of the systems that we've seen kill us in the past. So you can find out more information in the link that I dropped in the chat. Nate?
Great, thanks very much. I have sort of two questions, and I want to end on and make sure that we give enough time to address the common questions that we're presenting to all the experts and presenters at the conference. But maybe this question kind of touches on some of the comments you just made, but I was hoping both you and Peter might talk a little more broadly about this. So the movements to abolish the police, a lot of what you've been talking about is the work that needs to be done in concert with this, right? So if you're talking about sort of moving resources or talking about identifying resources within communities that can address the problems that we face on a daily basis, you're talking about sort of policing, which extends not only to police forces, but both other government entities and private entities. So I was just wondering if both of you could talk about maybe the 2 or 3 sort of allied movements that you think are really important for supporting this work to defund police.
Peter, you've been at this a little longer. I'll let you take it first.
I mean, definitely, I think just talking about prison abolition first and foremost, which is, I mean, basically where our movement comes from in terms of ideology. There's not that much new intellectual work done here. It's just taking work that people were doing around prison abolition in the last 20, 30 years and transferring it to police abolition, and just recognizing that you can't actually talk about one without talking about the other, because they are in many ways the same institution. And one of the key functions of the police is simply kind of the hands of the prison system and the entities which bring people into the prison system. So I think working really closely with prison abolition and bringing that into the conversations is something that we've been doing a lot of. Who else do we work a lot with? I mean, I think we work a lot with people who have been doing that direct response work in a way that hasn't even been talking about police abolition for years, but people are like, who have been doing say like harm reduction programs around drugs, like so promoting those resources, and they've been doing that for years. And people who've been doing things like providing people, doing things like Narcan trainings, doing things like providing syringe exchanges, a lot of that happening in my neighborhood. And so promoting those resources and working those and kind of calling those out as like the kinds of things that we could be funding a lot better and doing a lot more of, the kinds of things that like 211, like these things that's like already exist, but and if we gave them more funding, there's a lot more that we could do with it. There's some initiatives that have been really interesting on the north side here, like basically like anti-violence initiatives, like taking people maybe who have already been, there's an office on this, and it's kind of like a small pilot program here, but seems to be effective, where they take people who are basically flagged as likely to commit a violent crime, whether it's because they've already committed a small one or something like that, or and they just like work with those people really closely and to provide them the support that they need in order to not do those things, but not in a punitive way, like, okay, like, yeah, there needs to be like, you're gonna probably do something like that if there's not an intervention in this situation. And so working with them really closely. So that's just those are a few things. Those are some of the institutions that we work with, or just try to like call out as being really important, as well as just, yeah, there's also just a lot of like domestic violence institutions. There's several in Minneapolis that have been doing this work for years and years, of how to support people, because you know that a lot of communities, even when they haven't talked about police abolition, like for a lot of communities, the police have never kept them safe in certain key ways. So like people have already been adapting to that and making their own institutions to do the things that the police haven't doing. Because police abolition isn't just about removing the harm from what the police are doing, but it's also about doing the things that they're not doing and taking care of people in those ways. So.
Super, thank you.
I did nod really hard on that one. Yes.
So I wanted to, I wanted to end with a question that we're asking all of our.
Just real quick. I wanted to make sure that I was able to answer. Here in the Lehigh Valley, we've been working very closely with Black Lives Matter Lehigh Valley. We've actually been working with the United Way. You know, in the same way that the police hate being part of discussions that defunds them, organizations love being part of conversations where we're asking for more funding for them. Obviously, Lehigh Valley Mutual Aid, the Democratic Socialists of America, and so many, Cohesion Network, Unidos. There's a whole lot, Promise Neighborhoods of the Lehigh Valley. We all have a lot of different ways that we come about it. Lehigh Valley Stands Up. We like to say that while other people are in the streets, we are in the Google Sheets, because most of what we do is a lot of research on the back end to keep people engaged. So getting involved in any of these, Ken mentioned that you can't talk about abolishing prisons without talking about abolishing poverty. You can't talk about abolishing poverty without abolishing capitalism. And especially with organizations like the Ortiz Arc or Change Now LV, those are organizations that it's not the same as putting a Band-Aid on a wound. If you are helping a community by delivering food boxes or finding them assistance, what that's doing is it is helping people to survive in that moment so that we can keep on fighting for the transformative changes that we want to see. Yes, eventually we won't need food boxes if everyone is cared for, but now we do. And it's because we live under the systems of capitalism and white supremacy. that are continuing to keep our communities down. So there are a lot of opportunities to give to Lehigh Valley Mutual Aid, who is assisting the movement of all of the people in Tent City in Allentown. In Allentown, there's a homeless encampment called Tent City. The Allentown Commission has decided to sell that land and tell everyone that they need to be moved by November 14th. So the Tent City that has been there for years, they all need to find someplace else to live in the middle of fall. Yes, Sustain LV, the what Peter just dropped in there, that's an excellent resource to find more information on other things that are happening. I think that's it.
That was amazing. That was fantastic. I was also thinking that on the back end of this, that I'm already seeing, you know, I'm assuming that all of these organizations might have opportunities for our community, our students to do some work as part of their studies of the college. I wanted to end with this question, and Ashley, if you could kind of kick it off. You know, so again, thank you both for speaking today. What we'd like to ask is, what can Northampton Community College, what can our community, our students, our faculty, our staff, what can we do to help advance the work that you're doing?
I would say become a member of Lehigh Valley Stands Up. We are not at all tied to funds, or excuse me, we are incredibly tied to funds. We are not tied to funders. We answer to our members. And so becoming a dues paying member of Lehigh Valley Stands Up and giving to some of the organizations that I've mentioned that are doing some of the mutual aid work already, that's honestly the best way. We are organizing mainly on Slack. And so when you become a member, part of our outreach team will reach out to you and find out if you want to join our Slack, join a team, get more involved, because it's one thing to sign a petition and call it a day. It's another thing to actually, you know, kind of put yourself on the line and make the transformative changes that we need to see.
I don't have too much to add to that. I mean, it's as a non-regional organizer here, I'm like, yeah, support regional organizers doing things. I mean, yeah, like check out, I just dropped a link to our organization in the chat, and like that has a lot of great resources. So I really think it's really valuable, and point people there to learn stuff. We got all kinds of stuff. So we just want to be a resource. Yeah, I don't think, like, especially with the work we do, like, we're not looking for support. We're looking to support you all in what you're doing. So yeah.
Well, Peter, I might just chime in for a moment and just ask you, regionality aside, what would you like to see a community college in its unique institutional capacity, either on a level of like policy and initiatives from the administration, or curriculum from the perspective of faculty or students? Maybe it'd be easier for you to answer on a level of administration and faculty.
Sure. Yeah, and I know nothing about the college, really. So, I mean, like, what's the college's current relationship with police that it has, and like, we've had
the former chief of police of Allentown is our head of security.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, that seems like a good place to start. Is that we've had multiple in Minneapolis. Honestly, in Minneapolis, like a lot of the lofty things that we've had haven't really, like a lot of the lofty ideas we've had haven't led to much, but some of the things that have happened are a lot of institutions, the schools included, like the public schools included, but also some private institutions and a lot of businesses and things just severing their relationship with the police department. So, and I think like that's more of a piecemeal, but it's a big symbolic thing, especially for schools to do that, since I think in many ways they're seen as moral agencies within societies, for them to start saying that, like, no, we are gonna do things differently. So that's one direction I definitely point. I always try to, yeah, point people to start where they are. So
That's great. Well, I would just once again like to thank Ashley and Peter for joining us this morning, and for everyone who came out this morning to kick off today's conference. The conference continues this afternoon and tomorrow. And so with that, a very warm thank you to Peter and Ashley. Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you so much, guys. Thanks everybody who came out. And thanks, Nate, for being such a superb moderator. Peter, thank you for zooming in all the way from Minneapolis. Ashley, thank you so much for everything that you're doing for us at the conference. I will tell everybody who wants to stick around, we have a lot going on today at the second day of the Peace Conference. The next thing that is happening at 11 o'clock is actually, Ashley mentioned Justin Parker and Lehigh Valley Black Lives Matter. So Justin is going to be speaking to us. At 12:30, Shanta Ford is going to have an intimate conversation about race in a way that she does. At 2 o'clock, there's a panel on the prison industrial complex. At 3:30, the NAACP is coming to talk about racial trauma. And at 5 o'clock, there is Drew Sweberg is going to come to share the work that he's doing with high school students, getting cameras in their hands. And he's going to have some students come along as well and share some videos. And then we end the day at 6:30 with a screening of a movie about violence in Allentown called In Love, in Memory, with a Q&A by the director. So lots going on. So I'll take a quick 15-minute break, and I will hope to see many of you at 11 o'clock.